Welcome back to Anvil Doom Miniatures. My name is Deets and it's finally time for me to paint and build a miniature that has been on my wish list for a very long time now. I made a video when I first started this little channel well over a year ago now of a wish list of minis that I want to get my greasy mitts on. And around the time of making that video, these minis were virtually impossible to get. Well, technically you could get them, but not for a reasonable price. Now the good news is that I've managed to get my hands on a few of these minis and I've painted a couple up for the channel so far. And thanks to the latest Old World Empire release, I now have the opportunity to paint and build a war wagon for you all with some spiffy new horses in a glorious Averland Colour scheme. So sit back and relax as I try bring this revamped classic back to life. Now there's no pretty box for this big old wagon unfortunately, but beggars can't be choosers. This box contains some instructions, 6 men of the Empire, each with their own special weapon, an engineer who I'll leave out this time and maybe paint later on down the track, 2 new horses, I miss the old ones but again beggars can't be choosers, and all the bits to build the wagon. This war wagon kit comes in the universally feared Forge World resin. Now I do have a few of the new Old World characters in this resin and they've been nothing but great. They're really high quality, there weren't many imperfections on them, but this kit is a little bit different. As you can see, there's a little bit of leftover resin here and there and plenty of mold lines that will need to be cleaned up, and to be honest, I'm not that surprised as this is a bit of a bigger model, so I was kind of expecting it. I don't always get the chance to work with resin as I'm more of a metal man myself, but if you're working on this stuff, and especially if you're sanding it, wear a mask because you don't want to get any of this stuff up your schnoz. I did notice that this poor fella has a limp shaft, so I boiled some water, let it sit for a few minutes, then I dunked the halberd in for 10 seconds and straightened it up. I'm going to get this thing ready for a lick of paint, but because there are so many parts to this mini, and trust me, this thing is a lot more complicated than it seems, I'll build parts like the main wagon, the horses, the soldiers, and I'll paint them sub-assembled. There are a lot of hard to reach areas on this mini, like in between and under the horses, that I'll probably have a panic attack attempting to paint if it was fully built. All in all, I can't complain too much because compared to some older metal kits, I'm looking at Use Land Mage Priest, it's really not too hard to work with, it just takes a little bit more time. Anyway, let's slap some paint on this bad boy. I've given all the pieces a good old prime with some Wraithbone and now it's off to the races. Usually I take my time when tackling projects, but as this thing is going to be kind of a mini batch paint with the 6 boys, 2 horses and the wacky wagon to get through, I'm going to try paint it a bit faster but still have some sort of quality to the finished product. I want some black horses to be pulling this cart, but I want them to have a different tone compared to my usual Averland black colour scheme, so I'm using a mix of Stonewall grey and black to give me more of a grey tone to the horses. I mix in more and more Stonewall grey, covering less of an area until I have pure Stonewall grey as my final edge highlight, and I just do this to the tops of the muscles or any points of interest. Now I know I can be a slow painter, and as there are a few elements to get through like the frame, tiles, metals, I want to power through as many parts as possible that won't have as much impact on the finished product, so I'm going to do some dry brushing all over the timber frame of the wagon. There's definitely enough texture there to make this technique work, and I'm going to do this first so I can make a mess and cover up any of the paint that goes onto the tiled areas or fancy metal bits easily after. I've said it once before, but I'm really trying to make life as easy as possible, and I'm making the conscious effort to think what layers should be painted first, because miniatures like this do tend to turn into mini marathons for me, and I get easily burnt out. Recently I've noticed that my muscle memory has kind of set in, and I'm starting to move through more technical painting techniques way faster than when I first started pushing pigments around. It's something I didn't really notice until I had a deep look back through some of my old works. I've also been lucky enough to talk to some very talented mini painters out there, and they let me know how many miniatures they can kind of knock out in a single session and maintain a high standard, and that has me really inspired and determined to increase my speed but maintain the vibrant look I try to incorporate into my minis. As you can see, I'm painting the best state of the Empire, Averland, with all its glorious yellow and black on these tiled walls of the wagon, and I'll alternate from yellow to black on each panel to make it look interesting. If you look closely on how I'm painting each tile, you'll see that I'm applying the paint from one corner of the tile and then dipping down in the middle and then going back up to the opposite corner. I figured this would just give these tiles some shape and make them look like some light is hitting them from the top by giving them a shadow. Once I'm happy with that, I then give them a quick edge highlight and the bulk of this shopping trolley is finished. The leathers are up next, and I generally like these to be very rich, so I start off with a dark base of dried bark. I was lucky enough to catch up with a very skilled miniature artist who's competed in a few large painting competitions, including Golden Demon, for a couple of beers the other week, and we talked all things painting. he raised some great points about how paint should look on different surfaces and materials, and brought up that leathers look great with a soft finish. And I couldn't agree more, so I'm taking a few extra steps to get some practice in and see if I can achieve that soft color transition on my leather parts with more blending in between colors. I don't know if I nailed this. I tend to butcher things when I put too much thought into it, but hey, it's good enough for me. Now we've tackled the majority of the horses and the wagon, and it's time to slap down some true metallics. You'll notice that I've left the feathers and some other bits and pieces, mainly on the horses, and that's because the soldiers have some similar parts that I'll eventually paint together later on in the project. Once the silver and the gold is applied, it's time for a wash with some Nuln oil and some Gulliman flesh. I always add a little bit of water to my washes so they aren't too strong, and I make sure they pull in all the places I want shadows on my metallics. Alright, it's time to tackle some purity seals, and I never really get the opportunity to do these things that often because I don't really paint Space Marines regularly, and I'm sure all the Space Marine lovers out there will love this part, or they'll probably scream at me and tell me I'm doing it wrong. When I'm after a bone or kind of old paper-like look, I love using a bit of skeleton horde and medium. It's never streaky like pure skeleton horde, and it does the job nicely. Once that's all dry, I highlight it and do some scribbles with some dried bark on the paper, and then I work on the wax seal part with some deep reds. And I think I'll leave the horses and the wagons here and jump on to what is going to be the hardest part: batch painting 6 puffy sleeved fellas. So far so good, and I'm pretty happy with how this guy's turning out. It is taking a little bit more time than what I thought it would. But anyway, if you could slap the like button if you're enjoying the video, I'd really appreciate it. And if you like videos like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button because I have plenty more on the way. As I said at the start of the video, there are some miniatures that seem out of reach to the common hobbyist. And with a second-hand price of upwards of 500 Australian dollars, this thing made me feel like that for some time. If you did see it cheaper than that, you're a lucky bastard. The original version of the Wagon is one of those instant classics that has stuck with me for some time now. As you may know, I'm more of a painter, collector, and lore type of hobbyist, so minis like this are always high on my list. So when GW let us all know that it was getting a re-release, it had me pretty keen. What I think is great about this mini is how much character it has in its simplicity. It may be a basic 4-wheeled square bucket, but the hand sculpted details like the big cat on the front and the back and the eagles on the corners set it off, plus each of the soldiers are a unique sculpt with their own signature weapon, uniform and facial expression. Now this is obviously a normal thing these days, but it would have been super easy back in the day to just make a bunch of spearmen and a gunner and throw them in and call it quits. I can definitely see the potential for a brand new updated design of this wagon, or maybe a new type of war wagon in the future of the old world. As I'm recording this, we just had the Cathay announcement with all its new plastic minis, and oh boy do they look clean. I really do think the future of the old world is looking bright, and it's only a matter of time before all those old models they dumped on everyone at the start of the launch will get a refresh. One thing I've avoided and tried to dodge while painting Men of the Empire are the alternate colors on their puffy sleeves, but as these guys' sculpts are a bit more detailed, I don't think I can avoid it this time. I'm really lucky I have black in my color scheme because I can just use a wash of Seraphim Sepia over the top of the lot just to hide any spots of yellow I missed. I've used the same yellow and black recipes just like before, and as I was painting it, it kind of occurred to me that these guys will be inside this wagon most of the time, out of view, so I'm probably putting way too much effort in because the chances are you'll never see their pistons. After having this realization, I flew through their leather slippers. Seriously, I've never painted shoes this fast before. I made sure to keep the timber shafts or handles of their weapons fairly simple, and using a super skinny brush, I just applied some small lines and then placed some brighter, smaller lines inside to give it that wood grain texture look. And next up was the hair, and if you want to see how I tackle different colors, check out my Averland Archers video where I go into 4 different recipes for black, grey, brown, and blonde. I'll link it in the bio so you can check it out after this video. I want to get these feathers done super fast, so I'm slapping a couple thin coats of Ulthuan Grey over the feathers and the horse's fur trim near the saddle, and giving them a wash of 10 parts medium to 1 part Fenrisian Grey. And I do a couple coats of this, and then I mix up some more medium and rust grey with the same portions and apply this to the edges and folds just to darken them up a little bit. After this, I did touch them up with a little bit of Ulthuan Grey and some white here and there. And from here, I went bloody hard bringing these 6 trailer trash boys in line with the wagon by slapping down all of my metallics and washes, and then I spent about half a day working on highlighting all the armor and bells and whistles for the lot. I found this mini a bit deceiving because when I first started and I had it out all in front of me, I thought to myself, piece of cake, I'll get this thing done super fast. Little did I know I'll be spending 40 plus hours on this thing. So obviously my get this thing done quickly goal at the start went out the window somewhere along the way. So the marathon of painting yellow and black is finally over, and it's time to glue this thing together, and this was a little bit of a tricky process. I thought in this part of the video I'd give you some advice on how to build this thing, just in case you've bought this wagon and you've painted it sub-assembled like myself. Feel free to glue the wheels on first, but I highly recommend placing your horses down on the base first up with some blue tack and then getting them perfectly in line. When you're happy with that, you can glue the double saddle across their backs and this will hold them in place. Next, I blue tacked the middle shaft onto the wagon about halfway down on the lower vertical beam and gave it a slight angle upwards, and then glued this to the double saddle. On the instructions, it looks like you can have this thing connected completely horizontal, but I found through doing a mock-up build that if you glue it like the instructions, the side chains won't reach. Maybe my kit was a bit janky, but seriously, it won't hurt to do a mock build with some blue tack or poster putty first. And from here I got my base ready to go, and I like my horse's hoofs to be sunken into the mud, so I just marked them with a marker and then slapped down my sand, gave it a base coat of white just to make it pop. Then I painted it with some Xandri dust, gave it a wash, dry brushed it, and glued down some little clumps of gaming grass to finish it off. And that's pretty much it. Here is one Averland war wagon. Now this was a pretty big project for me. It was the first one I tackled since I got back from my little holiday, so thank you so much for sticking around to the end. I really appreciate it. Like always, I have to give a massive shout out to my Patreon members. You guys are a bunch of legends. I really couldn't do this without you, and you guys always keep me motivated, so thanks again. If you want to join the Anvil of Doom Patreon and support the channel, there's a link in the bio. Or if you want to support the channel in a different way, head on over to my merch store. I'll put the link in the bio, and I've got all sorts of prints and stickers there that you can purchase to jazz up your hobby space. Anyway guys, I'm out of here to go paint something a little bit smaller and easier. I'll see you all next time. Cheers.